I can. I'm going to move my, what's it called? I'm just gonna move.
Can we move this again?
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thanks, Norm. So I'm going to talk about two major structures, the Bluebird Lodge and Gold Hill Inn, but also the Colorado Mountain Ranch. And in researching this, I found out a lot of interesting trivia that I hope you guys will also find new and interesting, and some actually surprising connections between the Gold Hill Inn Bluebird Lodge and the Colorado Mountain Ranch. Several connections. So this is, as Joan was talking about, probably one of those staged pictures, and if you can read the bottom, which I'm pretty sure you can't, this photo was taken in front of what was then called maybe the Grand Mountain Lodge, maybe the Gold Hill Hotel, but definitely known as the Wentworth Hotel in 1888. And this picture was taken by J.B. Sturtevant, who, if any of you have spent any time in Boulder County, you know that he was better known as Rocky Mountain Joe, who the famous, long, dearly departed restaurant was named after.
And that photograph, that wonderful picture on the north wall over there, is also a Sturtevant from 1888, and it shows the town of Gold Hill now.
This is the earliest photo I could find of the hotel. It was built in 1873, and like I was shouting from the back earlier, it was built by a guy named Charles Wentworth. We don't have much information about him, and I knew that I had done a thorough research job when I said to Joan earlier today, I can't find out anything about Charles Wentworth, and she's like, I never could either. And so it must not be out there. But there's some, he either ran a hotel in Denver or Central City or maybe both, but ended up building this, not for miners or anything, but for tourists. So by 1873, our town was transitioning from mining to tourism for at least a short period of time. And you can see, this is looking up on Horsefall, looking down toward the west, and you can see in the back here, this is the kitchen area, and that little bit of structure still exists there, at least on some level, as that kitchen area in the back of the lodge, and this was a livery stable, I believe.
Yes.
And here's another one of those photos that Joan was talking about that was staged. I believe most of these were taken by the same photographer named Edwin Tangen, or Tangen, who was a local professional photographer, and there's a large collection of his at Carnegie. So this was 1886. It's kind of hard to see. I suspect the whole town came out, but it's kind of hard to see. But if you look at this woman in the white right here, she's got a baby buggy here, and there's a baby in there. And then here's a horse, of course. You got one horse in town. It's a one-horse town. By 1885, the hotel had been run by the Warren Marshall family. That was a guy who had been a miner in Caribou, and he and his family moved here. He had two sons. There's a picture of a daughter, but I'm not sure she lived to adulthood. He had two sons, one of whom was disabled from the age of 4 and was cared for by his brother. They ended up moving to Boulder like many, many people, and living in Boulder for many years. They moved to 21st and Mapleton in 1886, so before this picture was taken. And here you can see that it's called, this is that same Sturtevant picture. You can see that it's called the Kinney House, which is another, I've never been able to figure out why it was called that, so if anybody knows, shout it out to me. But one little bit of trivia, this girl right in the middle here wearing the plaid skirt or apron, is apparently has been identified as Annie Googe. And if you look on the back picture way back there past where Dana is, there's a whole display about the Googe family. And actually, Annie and her husband, Edwin, ended up running the hotel for a while. And the big thing, here you can see this, and I think Joan actually had this photo as well. You can see looking east, and across the street here, this building with the false front was, that's now the Sinner's Cabin, and it was, as Joan said, a saloon as well as the Googe store. And then the false front came off actually probably not long after this.
And the white building was the Kirkbride store.
Yeah, let me back up and show you that again. Yeah, so that Kirkbride store that Joan showed you the picture of is right here, and over here somewhere is where Marie's house is. So it's kind of interesting to see how the road is actually much different. And then the red store would be right around here. And this is another picture looking down from Horsfall. This is 1891. So around this time and the years right around there would have been kind of a heyday. Everybody's heard this story about how Eugene Field wrote Casey's Table d'Hote, or however you want to pronounce it, the famous poem about Gold Hill. At the Wentworth Hotel, Kinney House. It was a hangout for intellectuals. Clarence Darrow came, and it sounded like they partied their patoots off. And Horace Tabor stayed there as well. But I was trying to get more information about Eugene Field, and he spent actually very little time living in Colorado, and ultimately actually died at age 45. But one thing that was of interest to me as a criminal defense lawyer, that his father was actually the lawyer for Dred Scott, if you've ever heard of the Dred Scott decision. And Eugene Field's son, Eugene Field Jr., was a famous forger. So this is 1921, and you can see this sign is still there, the Bluebird Lodge, and it says Casey's Table d'Hote. And you know how Boyd talked about lies? There's a lie in your pamphlet. So get a pen and just cross out where it says it was originally built with boards. That was what I had thought. However, I read an article about the building of the Wentworth Hotel that said it was actually originally built with logs. As you saw in the other photos, it looks like it was built with boards, so I'm not sure. It probably was built with logs but faced otherwise. So
You're right, Mary Claire. There
Yeah.
are pictures of it as a log structure.
Yeah. So this is probably log. Whoops, I actually.
Yeah, you can see it on the back.
The backside, yeah.
The back is log, yeah, and you can see the. So 1891, and then the Googes bought and ran the hotel. Edwin and Annie Googe ran it from 1900 to 1910, and then it kind of went unused for 10 years until the Bluebirds bought it. Gene Sherwood, who was one of the more influential Bluebirds, bought it for the Bluebirds. This is 1921, and you can tell this date is attributed. However, if you ever want to try to figure out what date something is, because it already has the Bluebird sign, you know it's 1920 or after, and since it does not have a porch on it yet, you know that it was before 1922. This is the same year, the kitchen in the back. It looks almost exactly the same, just different Gold Hillians falling down the stairs. And so this is 1922, and Joan had this picture as well. But what's interesting to me partially is that it's right before apparently they put the porch on. And if you notice with all of these older photos, and even the older photo of this building, people built their houses and then added a porch on later on. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, everybody, I believe this is the Kirkbride store. So, I don't want to miss any of my exciting factoids. Here, there's the porch, magically appears. So this is 1925, right before they started building the inn, and these photos are pictures of the Gold Hill Inn being built, of logs, obviously, and Tim Walter built it. And Joan was telling me earlier today when I was showing her this, she said, you know, this building was really too big to be built as a log cabin. And so, you know, when you go in on Halloween, or, you know, if the Gas Pops are playing or something, and you're dancing and the floor is going bonga, 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 bonga at the inn, it might be a good idea to try to get close to a wall or something, because it was built out of logs, but it's too big to be built out of logs. That cable across the ceiling is actually holding the whole building together. So just be cautious with your dancing.
That previous picture had looked like it had dormers on the hotel that didn't exist before either.
So very clear.
This photo,
Yeah,
I
or were those there before?
don't know, let's look,
I don't-
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I think the dormers are new.
And probably,
Yeah.
there you go, good catch, thank you. Probably because they were using this, they were, you know, trying to turn it into a building that housed a lot more women. I mean, even at its heyday, as Jane, I think you mentioned this earlier, they were trying to house at least 100 women, and so the Bluebirds couldn't just be housed in the lodge. They stayed in other people's houses, they stayed all kinds of places in Gold Hill. And here's our
Cool.
Gold Hill Inn, again without a porch, but you can tell that that chimney's under construction. I don't know the exact year for this one, I don't think.
It looks like about a 28 or 30.
They built it for a dining hall.
Right, this was the dining hall for the Bluebird Lodge. And this card can give us kind of a clue about
Yeah.
when the picture might have been taken. Here's the finished product, 1927 with the fence.
Yeah, maybe it was earlier than that then.
And then this is a well-known old picture looking down from Horsefall. Here's the lodge, here's the inn. And see this X here? That is the center cabin. Oh, and here's the rink. The center cabin has an X on it because this photo was taken whoever had this photo in their possession sent it to a friend or acquaintance somewhere outside of Colorado saying, I'd like to sell the Gooch store. It's the one with the X on it. Let me know if there's anybody you know who wants to buy it.
Mary Claire?
Yeah,
Was the lodge used year round or just during the summer?
I think mostly during the summer.
And the inn as well, so they just sat vacant?
That's what I believe. I don't know though. Good question, and so next year, you're going to give a lecture on that. Yep, Deb taught me well. Okay, so I'm leaping forward. because I don't have a lot of photos. So, the fins. I got my information from materials that we have here in the museum, including newspaper articles, and this is a copy of a photo from a newspaper article that we have in our archives. The Carnegie Library, which has an incredible Boulder County collection, including a lot that you can access online, as well as some other online resources and the books that I have on Gold Hill. So this, as you probably know, is Frank and Barbara Finn. They came to Boulder in 1955, yeah. And by that point, the lodge and the inn were in complete disrepair. It went up for sale in 1957, both buildings, for $20,000. The Finns came out here because they were pretty clearly bohemians who left the East Coast, and Frank Finn had been a social worker and Barbara Finn was a chemist, and they moved out here to enjoy life, started the Y down in Boulder, were involved in that, and then just had this plan to move to Gold Hill because who doesn't love Gold Hill? And so they moved into the Red Store, and right across the street from them was this unused Bluebird Lodge and what is now the Gold Hill Inn. They'd never been inside, they didn't know anything about it, but one of the other people around Gold Hill opened it up for them, and they decided that what could be crazier than buying a wrecked hulk of, an antique building and doing something with it in the middle of nowhere. So, what I forgot to tell you was this little tidbit. In 1959, when they came here, the first job Frank Finn had was caretaker at the Colorado Mountain Ranch, yeah. And then they moved to the Red Store, and then decided to buy the hotel. And one thing I learned from the Carnegie's oral history collection, they have a number of oral history stories from people in Gold Hill, including, for example, Siobhan Finn gave them an interview in 2010, but they did an interview with Frank and Barbara Finn, which you can access online in the 90s, and it was really a delight to listen to, because never having met them, but hearing about what wonderful people they were, you can hear it in their voices, and they're laughing with each other, and they must have been just such great hosts and so charming that you can see why they made it a success. They're laughing about, and remember the time the governor showed up and had 150 people and we didn't have enough food and we ran out of, water. But so they started, first of all, with the inn, and then they revamped the lodge as a hotel. And this is right after they had a party to celebrate the opening of the hotel, and this is a person playing the piano who's identified, this is so 60s, as Mrs. Bruce Stebbins of Salina. So we don't know who she is.
Yes, we do.
We do.
She's here.
Who is it?
Marilyn Sobey's ex-husband.
That's Marilyn Sobey?
No, that's
Marilyn Sobey.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was Mrs. Bruce.
Okay, okay, thank you. See, this is awesome. All right, now we know it's Marilyn Sobey. Great.
Stebbins died and she became Pete Silver's wife.
Okay, fabulous. Because you can't see her face, obviously, so I had no idea.
For years.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that extra information. So when they reopened the hotel in 1965, by the way, they bought it, the way they remembered the date they bought it, April 21st, 1962, because it was Brian Finn's birthday. And he was a little kid, and they asked him what he wanted for his birthday, and he wanted to sleep in this decrepit old hulk of a building, so they let him. And so when they reopened in 1965, they had 12 rooms and a bridal suite, but no running water, and so they had hip baths. And the bathtubs had to be filled with buckets, like, you know, you read about in, you know, it's medieval. We're talking medieval here. So.
We
and
still
this
do
is
that,
Chef
don't we,
Joe
John?
Rogers serving one of their famous suckling pig kind of meals to some unknown guests. So I'm going to transition really quickly to the ranch. So these two ladies are Florence Malloy and Mabel McClay. This is Mabel McClay, this is Florence Malloy. This is 1922. They were women from Syracuse, New York, who moved out here to Boulder during the First World War. And they began, they had 3 children among them. They'd had some husbands, and the husbands didn't make it to Colorado, so who cares about them? You know, they're sometimes referred to as widows, sometimes divorced, but you know, the husbands don't figure in Gold Hill history, so who cares? So these women basically started a taxi cab company in 1916 when the guy who drove the taxi in Boulder went to war. And they became very, very good at it and had these incredible safety ratings. And because they were women, they would frequently take college students, particularly girls, because the college girls wouldn't need chaperones if they were being driven by women. But they were also excellent drivers. And when the flu epidemic hit in 1918, they were pressed into service with, for example, the Red Cross, and they would take doctors and medical supplies all around the area. And Florence Malloy, the taller one in particular, was known for her great driving skills. And during this epidemic, a young woman died, I'm not sure exactly where, but somewhere in the mountains, and the funeral parlor guy could not get there in his car. So she drove over the horrible roads and collected the body of this young woman. And that was a famous stunt, so to speak, that kind of solidified her status as, you know, the premier driver in the Boulder area. So these two women were very successful, and they had kind of a lock on the Union Station traffic. So they would pick up people at the station, drive them all over, and in the summers, they would take the college kids on tours of the mountains, go up to Estes. They also knew, guess who? Gene Sherwood, who bought the Bluebird Lodge. And they would take famous people who came to visit. There was a famous opera singer whose name escapes me, and Clarence and the opera singer, when Florence Malloy told her it was a quarter to drive up to Gold Hill, she's like, "A quarter? That's all?" And she gave her $5, and she's like, "I'm always down to help a sister." And that's literally the quote that was in the article about this. And they also drove Clarence Darrow, who was also a friend of Gene Sherwood's, to the Bluebird Lodge. So these were some really amazing women. Let me make sure I don't, they lived at 1019 Spruce Street, which is one of the oldest houses in Boulder. And their office was in the Boulderado, which is class with a capital K.
There's also a plaque of these two women in the parking structure at Pearl and Spruce, just west of Broadway. in that parking structure, there's a plaque about them.
Oh, okay, we'll have to check it out next time we're forced to park in that horrible. So, guess who was not a real fan of these women, especially after World War I? The men who came back and wanted to start rival taxi companies. And they were viciously opposed to female competition. So much so that at least one of them filed a legal complaint against them for, monopolizing the taxi market in Boulder. But unfortunately, I'm gonna jump forward to this slide. Unfortunately, also the KKK got involved, which is documented in this article from the Syracuse paper. Threats from the KKK, and the trouble became so serious that they were advised to sell the taxi division of their business, which they did. And here's a picture of them enjoying our beautiful mountain area. So what they did was, when they sold that taxi company, they bought the land that is now the ranch. It had apparently been owned by a very early miner, Eric Hollefson.
Yay for them.
Yeah. Let me see if I can, haha, the glasses, like, where are your glasses? Eric Bottolfson, I'm sorry. Eric and Rachel Bottolfson lived in Gold Hill until 1879, and they had originally owned the land that the ranch is on, and then it was owned, it was referred to as the Patton Ranch after that, but I couldn't find any more information about why it was called that, any family named Patton. So if anyone wants to do that research, you can give us that talk next time.
Who built the ranch?
Florence Malloy and Mabel McClay built the ranch.
Yes, the double M.
And this is one of the earliest pictures we have of it as the Double M Ranch. They named it after their last names. They built this in 1926, which is when they sold their yellow cab company. By the way, you may think it's unusual that the KKK was involved in this battle in the 20s. If you don't know, the governor of Colorado was a member of the KKK in the
Stapleton.
20s.
Golden was the regional head of the KKK.
Yeah, and Clarence Morley. And the mayor, you guys may have also heard recently there was an effort to rename the Stapleton area because former Mayor Stapleton also had very close ties, was in the KKK. So,
And they did remain stable.
questions?
Yeah, they did remain stable.
They did read.
Oh, they did, okay, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I think Central
I think the pandemic hit and I didn't think about anything but wine for a couple of years. So, 1927, sorry if I said, 1926 is when they sold the cab company. 1927, they built this to accommodate 35 people. And again, it was built for tourists. This was not a working ranch. This is a dude ranch. It was for Easterners to come out and see what life was like. And since those women were from Syracuse and they knew, the Bluebirds, they had connections back east. So they ran it until 1941 when they decided to move back to Boulder, and they lived very happily in Boulder, 28th and Baseline, and then later 1200 28th on a ranch down there until they both died in the early 50s. Now in 1947, I love this photo. Isn't this just beautiful? And this is no filter, people. And you can, so the rest of these photos are from the Walker era. So in the 40s, exactly, the year was 1947. Coach and Norma Walker bought the ranch, and so you can kind of tell by this car that was around that. And first called it the Trojan Ranch, and there was actually a Trojan mine not far from here, so I don't know if that was why they named it that, or if it was, you know, the fighting Trojan kind of thing. And honestly, if you want to get information from the Walkers about it, they're always too busy. So JoJo was kind of my source for a lot of the photos and history that I got of the more modern era of the ranch. And here's a picture from behind up on the hill. I think whoever took these really did a good job. And then here's some
dudes.
cow punchers. Look at that. I mean, if you wore a hat like that in West Texas, you'd get your ass kicked. Now look at that. They're Bobby Soxers and everything. Isn't that wholesome? This is my favorite. I'm like, where does this Adonis come from? It's like.
We're gonna find out that story.
So as you all probably know, the Walkers have owned the ranch now for over 60 years, 75 actually. And their family still runs it. Josie is probably the third. Josie and her sisters are the third generation. And here's our little town again, and this is another one of those early photos just to kind of close us out. And thanks all. Any questions? Feel free to look them up yourself.